champagne glass shattered against the floor of the first-class cabin like a gunshot, announcing the end of civility. $300 worth of Dom Perignon spread across the carpet in a golden stain. And for a moment, the only sound was the steady hum of engines, carrying 270 souls through the darkness above the Sea of Japan. Do you have any idea what you just did? Marcus Stanton rose from his seat like a thundercloud taking human form. 6'2", silver-haired, with the kind of jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as Mount Rushmore. His Armani suit cost more than most people's monthly salary, and the Top Gun pin on his lapel caught the overhead light like a tiny golden accusation. Former Navy pilot, current CEO of Stanton Defense Consulting, a man who had spent 30 years being the most important person in every room he entered. And right now, every ounce of that importance was focused on the small woman kneeling at his feet. Evelyn Hartwell kept her head bowed as she gathered the broken glass with trembling fingers. 34 years old, barely 5'4", with the kind of face that people forgot the moment they looked away. Her Delta Airlines uniform hung slightly loose on her frame, and her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail that somehow made her look even smaller. "I am so sorry, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will have this cleaned immediately, and of course Delta will cover any dry cleaning." "Dry cleaning?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This is a $4,000 suit, sweetheart. You think dry cleaning is going to fix this?" From the seat beside him, Derek Holloway leaned forward with the kind of grin that only generational wealth could produce. 28 years old, chiseled features, the son of a 3-star general who had never let anyone forget it. He wore his father's legacy like a crown, and right now that crown was tilted at an angle designed for maximum condescension. "This is exactly why I hate flying commercial," Derek said, loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. "The help these days cannot even carry a tray without creating a disaster." "What is next? Are they going to lose my luggage too?" A soft chuckle rippled through the nearby seats. Senator Victoria Ashford looked up from her tablet, her perfectly manicured eyebrows raised in amused agreement. At 53, she sat on the Senate Armed Services Committee and had built a career on looking down at people who were not useful to her advancement. Right now, the flight attendant on the floor did not appear useful at all. "Perhaps," the senator said, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of 1,000 campaign speeches, "we should request someone more experienced." Evelyn's hands continued their work, methodically collecting each shard of glass. Her fingers never hesitated, never shook more than that initial tremor. And if anyone had been watching closely, they might have noticed something strange. The way she gathered the pieces was precise, efficient, almost military in its economy of movement. But no one was watching closely. No one ever did. "I apologize again for the inconvenience," Evelyn said, rising to her feet with the broken glass cupped carefully in a napkin. "I will have a fresh glass brought to you immediately. Compliments of—" "I don't want another glass," Marcus waved his hand dismissively. "I want competent service. Is that too much to ask at 30,000 feet? Raymond Chen, seated across the aisle, looked up from his laptop with the expression of someone who had found a new specimen to examine. 51 years old, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of aviation consultant who corrected pilots on terminology and genuinely believed he was being helpful. "You know," Raymond said, adjusting his glasses, "I have been observing the crew's performance throughout this flight. The service protocols are adequate, but the execution leaves much to be desired. This young woman, for instance, demonstrates a fundamental lack of spatial awareness that is frankly concerning in an aviation environment." He delivered this assessment as if presenting findings at an academic conference, completely oblivious to the fact that Evelyn was standing 3 feet away. "Spatial awareness," Derek repeated with a snort. "Is that the fancy way of saying she cannot walk straight?" More laughter. Marcus settled back into his seat with the satisfaction of a man who had successfully established the natural order of things. And through it all, Evelyn stood perfectly still, her face arranged in an expression of professional contrition that revealed nothing of what lay beneath. She had heard worse, much worse, in places where words were the least of your concerns. Amy Nguyen appeared at her elbow like a guardian angel in a Delta uniform. The senior flight attendant was in her early 40s, with kind eyes and the sort of calm efficiency that came from 2 decades of managing impossible passengers at impossible altitudes. "I will take care of this," Amy said quietly, her hand briefly touching Evelyn's arm. Go check on the passengers and economy. I have got things handled here. Evelyn nodded, but before she could move, she paused to fold the napkin containing the broken glass. Her fingers moved automatically, creating precise triangles, sharp edges aligned perfectly, the fold pattern unmistakably military. It took exactly 3 seconds. No one noticed, except for one person. In Seat 4D, Master Sergeant Frank Ortega lowered the magazine he had been pretending to read. 61 years old, weathered face, the kind of eyes that had seen everything and forgotten nothing. He had served 34 years in the United States Army, from the jungles of Panama to the mountains of Afghanistan, and he knew military bearing when he saw it. That napkin fold was not something you learned in flight attendant training. He filed the observation away and continued watching. Evelyn made her way through the first class toward the curtain separating it from business class, her steps measured and quiet. She passed Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell, an elderly woman traveling alone in Seat 6A, who offered her a sympathetic smile. The old woman's fingers rested on a faded photograph in her lap, a young man in a pilot's uniform from another era. "Don't let them bother you, dear," Mrs. Mitchell said softly as Evelyn passed. "My husband flew in Vietnam. He always said the ones who talk loudest have usually done the least." Evelyn paused, and something flickered in her eyes. Gratitude, perhaps, or recognition. "Thank you, ma'am," she said. "Your husband sounds like he was a wise man." "He was, Mrs." Mitchell's smile carried decades of memory. "He would have liked you, I think." Evelyn continued toward the curtain, and as she walked, Marcus Stanton's voice carried from behind her with the casual cruelty of someone who knew he would never face consequences. "Can you believe they let people like that near a cockpit? I have seen more competence at a fast food drive-through." The laughter that followed was the sound of people who had confused wealth with worth. Evelyn did not react. Her face remained perfectly neutral, her pace unchanged. But as she pushed through the curtain into business class, she allowed herself one small moment, a single breath, held and released. Her shoulders settled back, her spine straightened to exactly 45 degrees. Her chin lifted by a fraction of an inch, the posture of someone who had spent years standing at attention. And then it was gone, smoothed away like ripples on still water. 30,000 feet below, the Sea of Japan stretched endlessly into the darkness. And somewhere on the edge of radar range, 4 shadows were beginning to move. The aircraft shuddered almost imperceptibly, a tiny vibration that most passengers would attribute to turbulence. But Evelyn felt it differently. Her body registered the change before her mind could process it. Some ancient instinct awakening in the back of her skull. Something was wrong. She paused in the business class galley, her eyes automatically tracking toward the cockpit door. Through the reinforced barrier, she could hear nothing unusual, but her skin prickled with awareness, the kind of sensation that had saved her life more times than she cared to remember. Tyler Brooks, a young private first class in civilian clothes, looked up from his seat as she passed. He was barely 22, heading home on leave for the first time in 18 months, and the exhaustion of deployment still clung to his features like a second skin. "Ma'am," he said, noticing her sudden stillness, "everything okay?" Evelyn forced a smile. "Just checking on everyone. Can I get you anything?" "No, ma'am, thank you." He settled back into his seat, but his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. Something about the way she carried herself reminded him of his commanding officers. The plane shuddered again, more noticeably this time. In first class, the conversation had shifted to business. Marcus was explaining his company's latest defense contract to Derek, their voices carrying the self-important cadence of men who believe their words shape the world. "The Pentagon is finally understanding the value of privatized intelligence operations," Marcus was saying. "My firm has contracts with 3 separate branches now. The access we have is unprecedented." "My father mentioned your work," Derek replied. "He said Stanton Defense is doing things that would make traditional military intelligence look like amateur hour." "Your father is a perceptive man. We have assets in places that the official agencies cannot even acknowledge exist." Ortega listened from his seat, his expression revealing nothing. But something about Marcus's words made his jaw tighten, almost imperceptibly. The intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Thomas Reed speaking." The pilot's voice carried a forced casualness that did not quite mask an underlying tension. We are experiencing some unusual radar activity in the area. There is no cause for alarm, but I would ask everyone to please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until further notice. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, some concerned, others merely annoyed at the interruption. Marcus scoffed. Unusual radar activity. Translation, some fishing boat pinged their systems and now they are panicking. This is what happens when you let civilians run aviation. You know, Derek added, if this were a military transport, we would already have fighter escort. But commercial flights, they just leave you hanging in the wind. In the galley, Evelyn stood frozen, her eyes fixed on something no one else could see. Her fingers had gone still on the drink cart, and her breathing had become shallow and controlled. Unusual radar activity. The words echoed in her mind, connecting to memories she had spent years trying to bury. She had heard that phrase before. Different language, different continent, but the same quiet terror lurking beneath professional understatement. The cockpit door opened, and First Officer William Morrison emerged, his face pale beneath the forced calm of a man trying very hard not to show fear. He scanned the first-class cabin until his eyes landed on Amy Nguyen. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Now." Amy moved toward him, and Evelyn watched from behind the curtain as they huddled in whispered conversation. She could not hear the words, but she could read the body language well enough. Morrison's shoulders were tight, his hands clenched at his sides. Amy's face went from professional concern to genuine alarm in the span of seconds. Then Morrison said something that made Amy's hand fly to her mouth. The plane shuddered again, harder this time, and a collective gasp rose from the passengers. Through the windows, the darkness outside seemed to press closer, more threatening. Evelyn moved. She did not make a conscious decision. Her body simply responded to years of training that no amount of civilian life could erase. She walked toward the galley where Amy and Morrison were conferring, her footsteps silent on the carpet, her presence unremarkable. Just another flight attendant checking on the situation. Nothing to see here. "What's happening?" she asked quietly, positioning herself so that her body blocked the conversation from the curious eyes of first-class passengers. Morrison looked at her, and for a moment, his professional mask slipped. She could see the terror beneath. "4 bogies on radar," he whispered. "Military configuration. They appeared out of nowhere about 5 minutes ago, and they are closing fast." Amy's hand trembled as she pressed it against her chest. "What does that mean? Are we being... Are they gonna... I don't know." Morrison ran a hand through his hair, disheveling the careful styling. "Captain Reed is trying to contact them on emergency frequencies, but there's no response. They're just closing in." "Have you contacted air traffic control?" Evelyn asked, her voice remarkably calm. Morrison nodded. "Tokyo Center handed us off to some kind of military coordination frequency. They're trying to get U.S. assets scrambled, but we're in a gray zone, international airspace. It could be 20 minutes before anyone reaches us." 20 minutes. An eternity at 30,000 feet with hostile aircraft approaching. Evelyn's mind was already calculating trajectories, distances, fuel loads. The numbers came automatically, unbidden, drawn from a well of knowledge she had tried to seal shut. "What kind of aircraft?" she heard herself ask. Morrison blinked, momentarily confused by the question coming from a flight attendant. "What?" "The bogies. What configuration did radar show?" The captain said they looked like MiG-29s based on the signature, but that does not make sense. We're nowhere near Russian airspace, and the Chinese use different fulcrums," Evelyn murmured, so quietly that only she heard it. 4-ship formation, probably 2 elements of 2. Standard intercept pattern." The words had escaped before she could stop them, carried on the current of memories she could not quite control. Morrison was still talking, something about emergency procedures and passenger notification, but Evelyn was no longer listening. Her eyes had drifted to the window, where the night sky stretched endlessly beyond the reinforced glass. Somewhere out there, in that darkness, 4 hunters were converging on 270 souls. And the only person on board who understood exactly what that meant was wearing a Delta Airlines uniform and pretending to be nobody at all. The first MiG appeared on the left side of the aircraft, like a ghost materializing from shadow. One moment, there was nothing but darkness and the distant shimmer of stars. The next, a sleek gray shape was sliding into formation barely 100 meters from the Boeing's wingtip, its navigation lights cutting through the night like predators' eyes. The screaming started almost immediately. A woman in business class pressed her face against the window and let out a shriek that could have shattered crystal. Others joined her, a chorus of terror that spread through the cabin like wildfire. Passengers stumbled into the aisles, desperate to see, desperate to understand, desperate to do anything except sit helplessly as their world tilted toward catastrophe. Everyone remained calm, Amy's voice cracked over the intercom. But calm was a foreign concept now. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. The crew is handling the situation, as if there was a protocol for this, as if anyone had ever written a manual titled What to Do When Enemy Fighters Box Your Commercial Aircraft Over International Waters. Marcus Stanton was on his feet before anyone could stop him, his face flushed with the kind of excitement that only men who had never truly faced death could muster. I knew it, he announced to no one in particular. Hostile intercept. This is why commercial aviation is a joke. No defensive capabilities, no escort protocols, nothing but civilians panicking while the real threat closes in. He pushed toward the cockpit, Derek Holloway close behind. Let me through, Marcus commanded. I have 3,000 hours of military flight time. I can't help. The cockpit door remained sealed. Sir, please return to your seat, Morrison said, positioning himself between Marcus and the door. The captain is handling what? Getting us killed? Marcus's voice rose to a near shout. I have flown combat missions over 3 continents. I have seen more hostile airspace than that captain has seen sunrises. Now open this door and let me help before we all die. I am former Navy Top Gun graduate, Derek added, his chin raised with inherited authority. Between the two of us, we have more qualified combat experience than your entire crew combined. Morrison's face hardened. He was a good man, a competent pilot, but he was also a civilian who had never faced anything more threatening than a mechanical warning light. The weight of 270 lives pressed down on him, and the temptation to hand that weight to someone who claimed to know what they were doing was almost overwhelming. Sir, he began, I appreciate your experience, but protocols clearly state. The aircraft lurched. Through the windows, the second MiG had slid into position on the right side, mirroring its partner. The Boeing was bracketed now, boxed in by machines designed for a single purpose. They are hurting us, Marcus said, his tone shifting to something almost gleeful. Classic intercept formation. They want us to change course. To where? Morrison asked. Wherever they want us to go. Marcus's smile was wolfish. And if we don't comply, those AA-12 missiles under their wings are not just for show. The radio in the cockpit crackled loud enough to be heard through the door. Delta Flight 7742, this is Russian Air Defense Command. The voice was cold, mechanical, speaking English with an accent that turned every word into a threat. You have violated sovereign airspace. Change course to heading 045 immediately and prepare for escort to Vladivostok, or you will be shot down. You have 60 seconds to comply. Silence, then chaos. Passengers screamed. Someone began praying loudly in Korean. A child started crying, her wails cutting through the adult terror like a knife through fog. Marcus pushed harder against Morrison. Move, now! That was not a suggestion they just made, and your captain is going to get everyone killed if he does not respond correctly. Sir, I cannot. We are in international airspace, Derek shouted. This is illegal. They cannot do this. International law does not mean anything when you have missiles locked on you, Raymond Chen observed from his seat, his academic detachment finally cracking under the pressure of reality. From a purely tactical standpoint, we are entirely at their mercy. Senator Ashford had gone pale, her tablet forgotten in her lap. For perhaps the first time in her political career, she found herself in a situation that could not be resolved with a phone call or a press release. Someone needs to do something, she said, her voice smaller than anyone had ever heard it. We have to. She did not finish the sentence. What could they do? What could any of them do? Through it all, Evelyn Hartwell remained still. She stood at the edge of the first-class cabin, watching the chaos unfold with eyes that had seen worse, much worse. Her body was perfectly relaxed, her breathing slow and controlled, every muscle ready to move but choosing stillness. The countdown in her head had already begun. 60 seconds, 59, 58. The MiG on the left dipped its wing, a gesture that was somehow more threatening than any weapon. It was so close now that she could see the pilot's helmet through the canopy, could make out the red star painted on the fuselage. 50 seconds. 49. Morrison was still blocking the cockpit door, his face a mask of terrified indecision. Marcus was shouting something about military protocols and civilian incompetence. Derek was on his phone, trying to call someone, anyone, as if cellular service existed at 30,000 feet over international waters. 40 seconds. Amy caught Evelyn's eye from across the cabin, and something passed between them. A question, perhaps, or a plea. Evelyn took a breath, then she moved. She walked toward the cockpit with a pace that was neither rushed nor hesitant. Her footsteps were silent on the carpet, her presence somehow commanding despite her small stature. The chaos seemed to part around her, passengers falling quiet as she passed, as if some unconscious part of their brains recognized authority even when their conscious minds could not. Marcus saw her approaching and sneered. "Oh, wonderful. The coffee girl wants to help. Why don't you go check on the passengers, sweetheart, and let the adults handle this?" Evelyn stopped directly in front of him. For a moment, nothing happened. She simply stood there, looking up at a man who towered over her by nearly a foot, her expression completely neutral. Then she spoke. "Step aside." 2 words. No anger, no fear, no desperation. Just a command delivered with the quiet certainty of someone who expected to be obeyed. Marcus laughed. "Excuse me? Do you have any idea who I am? I have flown F-14 Tomcats over—" "You flew training missions over Nevada," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through his bluster like a blade through paper. "Your combat record consists of 2 deployments to the Persian Gulf during periods of minimal hostile activity, and your last active flight was 19 years ago. You have not touched a military aircraft since the Clinton administration." Marcus's mouth opened, but no sound came out. How did she know that? How could she possibly know that? "Step aside," Evelyn repeated. "Now." And then she did something that made everyone in first class stop breathing. She turned to Morrison, and when she spoke, her voice was completely different, deeper, harder. The voice of command, of authority, of someone who had given orders in moments when hesitation meant death. "Open the door." Morrison's hand moved to the keypad before his brain could catch up. His fingers entered the code automatically, responding to something in her tone that bypassed conscious thought entirely. The door clicked open. "Wait!" Marcus grabbed her arm. "You cannot just—" Evelyn's head turned toward him, and he saw her eyes clearly for the first time. They were not the eyes of a flight attendant. They were the eyes of a hunter. His hand fell away. 20 seconds on the countdown. Evelyn stepped into the cockpit. "Before we continue with this incredible story, if you want to know what happens when the F-22 Raptors arrive and say her call sign, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now. Trust me, the twist coming up will make you stop everything you are doing. Now, back to 30,000 feet. The cockpit was a symphony of alarms. Red lights pulsed across the instrument panel. Warning tones competed for attention like desperate children. And in the captain's seat, Thomas Reed sat frozen, his hands gripping the yoke with the white-knuckled terror of a man who had just discovered that 23 years of commercial aviation had not prepared him for this moment. "Captain," Evelyn said, closing the cockpit door behind her and sealing out the chaos of the cabin. Reed did not respond. His eyes were fixed on the radar display, where 4 hostile signatures surrounded his aircraft, like wolves circling a wounded deer. "Captain Reed?" Still nothing. His breathing was rapid and shallow, the precursor to a full panic response. Evelyn moved to the co-pilot's seat, where the instruments screamed their warnings into the void. Through the windscreen, she could see the lead MiG perfectly now, so close that the aircraft seemed to fill the entire world. 12 seconds. "Thomas." She used his first name, pitching her voice to cut through the fog of terror. "Look at me." His head turned slowly, mechanically, and she saw the moment his eyes focused on her. Confusion flickered across his features, struggling against the grip of fear. You are the flight attendant. What are you doing in my cockpit?" "I am going to help you save 270 lives," Evelyn said. "But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" "Trust you? You serve coffee. The radio exploded with Russian. "Delta 7742, your time has expired. Change course immediately or we will open fire. This is your final warning." 6 seconds. Reed's hands began to shake. His breath came in ragged gasps. And then, with the sudden finality of a circuit breaker tripping, his eyes rolled back and his body went limp against the seat restraints. Cardiac event. Stress-induced. Non-fatal, probably, but completely incapacitating. 2 seconds. Evelyn did not hesitate. Her hands found the yoke and throttle, as if they had never left. Muscle memory took over, years of training surging through neural pathways that civilian life had never quite managed to close. She scanned the instruments in a single sweep, absorbing airspeed, altitude, heading, fuel state, all of it processing in the back of her mind while her conscious attention focused on the immediate threat. 0. The lead MiG's wings flashed as it began its attack run. Evelyn pushed the yoke forward and left, dropping the Boeing 300 feet in a diving turn that commercial aircraft were never meant to perform. The passengers screamed as gravity shifted, as carry-on bags flew from overhead compartments, as the world tilted on its axis. The MiG's first burst went wide, tracers cutting through the space where the Boeing had been a half-second earlier. "Holy!" Morrison's voice came from behind her. He had pushed into the cockpit, his face white with terror. "What are you? How did you—" "Co-pilot seat," Evelyn commanded without looking at him. "Now, I need someone monitoring fuel and systems while I fly." "You cannot fly this aircraft. You are not certified. You are not—" Evelyn pulled the Boeing into a climbing right turn, using the aircraft's momentum to slide past the second MiG's intercept angle. The massive airliner groaned in protest, its airframe flexing under stresses it was never designed to endure. "I am the only person on this aircraft who knows how to survive a hostile intercept," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Captain Reed is incapacitated. You can either help me or get out. Those are your options." Morrison stared at her for a long moment, then he slid into the co-pilot's seat. "Fuel state? Morrison scanned the instruments, his training kicking in despite his terror. 63%, enough for another 8 hours at current consumption. Hydraulics? Green across the board. How did you know to— Engine temperatures? Normal range, both engines performing within parameters." Evelyn nodded, already processing the information while simultaneously tracking the MiGs on radar. They had recovered from her initial maneuver and were reforming, 2 elements of 2, preparing for another coordinated pass. "They are professionals," she murmured, more to herself than to Morrison. "Formation discipline is tight. No wasted movement. Probably veterans?" "How do you know that?" She did not answer. Instead, she keyed the radio to a frequency that no commercial pilot had any business knowing. "Overwatch, Overwatch, this is Delta 7742 declaring emergency. We have 4 hostile interceptors with weapons hot, pilot incapacitated, requesting immediate assistance. 270 souls on board. Static." Then a voice crackled through, female, professional, with an undercurrent of controlled urgency. "Delta 7742, this is AWACS Overwatch. We are tracking your situation. Be advised, we have 2 F-22 Raptors scrambling from Kadena, but current ETA is 12 minutes. Can you maintain?" 12 minutes, against 4 MiGs with live weapons and apparent authorization to fire. "We will manage," Evelyn said, "requesting you relay our situation to Pac Fleet Command. And Overwatch." She paused. "It is good to hear a friendly voice out here." A brief silence. Then, "Copy that, Delta 7742. Overwatch has you covered. Stay strong." The radio clicked off. Morrison was staring at her. "How did you know that frequency? That is classified military communications. Commercial pilots do not have access to—" "Check our heading," Evelyn interrupted. "I need to know if we have any viable divert options within 500 nautical miles. Our heading is—" "Wait." Morrison's eyes widened as he studied the navigation display. "You change course. We are not heading toward Vladivostok anymore." "No. But they said—" "They said a lot of things." Evelyn's voice was flat. "They are also not going to shoot us down. How can you possibly know that? Because if they wanted us dead, we would already be dead." Those warning shots were exactly that. Warnings. They are trying to force compliance, not destruction, which means we have leverage. Morrison shook his head in disbelief. "Who are you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Evelyn did not answer. Her attention was fixed on the radar, where the MiGs were reforming for another pass. "Brace," she said, and then she put the Boeing into a maneuver that should have been impossible. Marcus Stanton had forced his way to the cockpit door, his face a mask of fury and fear. Through the reinforced barrier, he could hear the engines straining, could feel the aircraft moving in ways that commercial airliners were never meant to move. "This is insanity," he shouted at no one in particular. "That woman is going to kill us all. Someone needs to stop her." Derek appeared at his side, his earlier bravado stripped away to reveal the frightened young man beneath. How is she doing this? Flight attendants do not know how to fly combat maneuvers. They don't. Marcus's mind was racing, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew to be possible. No one can fly a 777 like this. The structural limitations, the response time, the sheer mass of the aircraft, it should not be possible. In Seat 4D, Master Sergeant Ortega was watching the cockpit door with an expression of quiet recognition. He had seen pilots like this before, not many, only a handful in his 34 years of service. The ones who could make any aircraft dance, who could feel their way through the situations that would kill lesser aviators. Operators called them naturals. The ones who were born for the cockpit the way some people were born for the operating room or the battlefield. But there was something else about this woman, something in the way she moved, the way she spoke, the way she folded that napkin. Military, definitely military, but not just any military. The aircraft leveled out momentarily, and through the window, Ortega could see one of the MiGs sliding past, its pilot visible through the canopy. Even at this distance, he could see the frustration in the fighter pilot's body language. They were not used to their prey fighting back. Good. "Passengers, this is your co-pilot speaking." Morrison's voice came over the intercom, strained but attempting professionalism. "We are currently experiencing a security situation that requires some non-standard maneuvering. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. The crew is working to resolve the situation." Resolve the situation? Karen Price, the chief purser, had made her way to first class, her face pale. What situation? Who is flying this plane? "One of our crew members has taken control," Morrison said carefully over the intercom. "She is extremely qualified." "Qualified?" Marcus exploded. "She is a flight attendant. She probably got her license from a cereal box. I demand to know what is happening in that cockpit right now." Amy Nguyen stepped forward, positioning herself between Marcus and the cockpit door with a courage she did not entirely feel. "Sir, please return to your seat. The situation is being handled." "Handled by whom? A woman who serves drinks for a living?" Marcus's face had gone red, veins pulsing at his temples. "I have personally logged more combat hours than she has probably logged anything. This is my expertise. This is what I trained for. And you are going to let some nobody." The aircraft rolled sharply to the left, cutting off his tirade and sending him stumbling against the bulkhead. In the cockpit, Evelyn had spotted the MiG setting up for a pincer maneuver. Classic tactic. Two aircraft coming from opposite directions to eliminate the target's escape routes. But classic tactics assumed a predictable target. She was not predictable. The Boeing rolled through 90 degrees of bank, far beyond any commercial aircraft's normal operating envelope. Passengers screamed. Oxygen masks deployed automatically, and for 3 impossible seconds, the airliner flew sideways through the sky. Then she leveled out, and the MiGs shot past each other, their carefully coordinated attack thrown into disarray. "That is not possible," Morrison whispered. "The aircraft cannot, the passengers cannot." "The Boeing 777 is rated for 2.5 Gs in emergency situations," Evelyn said, her voice clinical. "We peaked at 1.8. Uncomfortable, but survivable. How do you know the G limits of a commercial aircraft?" "The same way I know the G limits of an F-22 Raptor. Same way I know the turn radius of a MiG-29 at various altitudes and airspeeds. Same way I know that in approximately 45 seconds, they are going to try a vertical bracket maneuver, and when they do, we are going to use their own tactics against them." Morrison's mouth opened and closed several times. "Who are you?" he finally managed. Evelyn's hands moved across the control panel, adjusting trim, monitoring engine temperatures, tracking the hostile signatures on radar. "Someone who should have stayed dead," she said quietly. The words hung in the air, unexplained, ominous. Before Morrison could respond, the radio crackled. "Delta 7742, this is AWACS Overwatch. The F-22 flight is inbound. ETA now 9 minutes. Can you confirm status?" "Copy, Overwatch. Still flying, still breathing. Hostiles are regrouping for another pass." "Understood. Be advised. The lead F-22 is callsign Viper. He is requesting confirmation of who is currently flying that aircraft." Evelyn's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Tell Viper that the aircraft is under control. That is all he needs to know." A pause. Delta 7742, Viper is insisting. He says your flight profile is inconsistent with commercial aviation training. He wants to know who he is about to risk his life to protect. Morrison looked at her. What should I tell them? Evelyn was silent for a long moment. Her eyes remained fixed on the horizon, where the first hint of dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. Tell him, she started, then stopped. Tell him what? The truth? After 3 years of hiding, of building a new life, of becoming someone else entirely, after everything she had sacrificed to disappear? The MiGs were reforming. The clock was ticking. And somewhere out there, 2 F-22 Raptors were racing toward her, flown by pilots who might recognize her flying style, her tactics, her signature. Tell him that whoever is flying this aircraft will get these passengers safely on the ground, she finally said. That is all that matters right now. Morrison relayed the message. The radio was silent for a long moment. Then, copy, Delta 7742. Viper acknowledges. Help is on the way. Help. The word echoed in Evelyn's mind, carrying memories she had tried to bury. Help had been on the way in Syria too. She still remembered the radio calls, the frantic coordination, the promises that extraction was coming. Help had arrived 43 minutes too late. By then, she was the only one left alive. She pushed the memory away. That was another life, another person. The woman who had died in that desert was not the woman sitting in this cockpit, or so she told herself. The MiGs began their next approach, and Evelyn Hartwell, formerly of the United States Air Force, began to fly. The next 7 minutes were the longest of Morrison's life. He watched in stunned silence as the woman beside him performed maneuvers that defied everything he knew about commercial aviation. She flew the Boeing like a fighter jet, anticipating the MiGs' movements before they completed them, always positioning the massive aircraft just outside their optimal engagement parameters. It was impossible, and yet it was happening. Bank angle coming up, Evelyn said, her voice unnaturally calm. Watch the number 2 engine temperature. If it spikes above normal range, let me know immediately. How are you doing this? Experience. The word was flat, emotionless. Check engine temps. Nominal, Evelyn. If that is even your real name, I need to understand what is happening here. What is happening is that I am keeping us alive until those F-22s arrive. That is all you need to understand right now, the radio crackled. Delta 7742, Viper flight is visual, 2 F-22 Raptors inbound, your 6 o'clock low, distance 15 miles. Relief flooded Morrison's face, but Evelyn's expression did not change. If anything, she seemed to grow more tense. Copy, Viper flight. Be advised, hostiles are currently in a diamond formation at our 12 o'clock, distance 8 miles. They appear to be setting up for another intercept run. Understood, Delta. We are engaging. Through the windscreen, Morrison could see tiny shapes emerging from the dawn sky, moving impossibly fast. The F-22 Raptors, 5th-generation fighters, the most advanced combat aircraft in the world. The MiGs saw them too. For a long moment, nothing happened. The two formations faced each other across miles of contested airspace, predators measuring predators. Then the lead MiG broke formation. It turned away, its wingman following, and within seconds all 4 hostile aircraft were retreating toward the northern horizon. They did not look back. Delta 7742, Viper flight. Hostiles are breaking off. Looks like they decided they did not want to play anymore. Morrison let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. Oh, thank God. We are safe. But Evelyn's hands remained tight on the yoke. Viper flight, she said into the radio. Request escort to Kadena. We have a pilot medical emergency and need immediate priority handling. Copy, Delta. We have you covered. We'll escort to Kadena and coordinate emergency services. The F-22s slid into formation on either side of the Boeing, their sleek shapes visible through the cockpit windows. After the terror of the MiGs, their presence was almost absurdly reassuring. Morrison slumped in his seat. I cannot believe we are alive. I do not have words for what that was. Evelyn said nothing. She was watching the lead F-22 through the left window, something unreadable in her expression. Delta 7742, this is Viper lead. The voice on the radio had changed, becoming more personal. I have to say, whoever is flying that bird right now is putting on one heck of a show. Those maneuvers you pulled, I have not seen flying like that since... He trailed off. Since what? Morrison asked, glancing at Evelyn. She did not respond. Her jaw had tightened, and her knuckles were white on the yoke. "Since Top Gun," Viper Lead finished slowly. "Delta 7742, I need you to confirm something for me. The pilot currently at the controls. What is their background?" Morrison looked at Evelyn. She shook her head slightly. "Viper Lead, the pilot has asked to remain anonymous. What matters is that we are all safe now." A long pause. Then, "Delta 7742, this is Lieutenant Jake Williams, call sign Reaper. I am not asking as an escort pilot. I am asking as someone who trained at Miramar for 3 years. The maneuvers I just watched, there are maybe 6 people in the world who could have pulled those off in a commercial aircraft, and 3 of them are dead." Evelyn closed her eyes. "Reaper," she finally said, keying the radio herself. "This is Delta 7742. Appreciate the assist. Let's just focus on getting these passengers safely on the ground." Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Then, that voice. Reaper's words came slowly, each one heavy with disbelief. "I know that voice. Delta 7742, I need you to confirm something for me. I need you to tell me your call sign." The cockpit seemed to shrink. Morrison was staring at Evelyn with wide eyes, finally beginning to understand that he had stumbled into something far larger than a simple emergency. "Reaper," Evelyn said, "this is not the time or place for your call sign." His voice cracked slightly. "Please, I need to know." The Boeing flew on through the dawn sky, bracketed by fighters, heading towards safety. But inside the cockpit, time had stopped. Evelyn took a breath, and then another. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the radio. "Reaper," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, This is Widowmaker." The radio went dead. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing. No acknowledgement, no response. Just the steady hum of engines and the distant whisper of wind over wings. Then Jake Williams's voice came through, broken and raw. Widowmaker? No, that is not possible. You are dead. We had a memorial. I spoke at your memorial. His voice cracked completely. "I carried your flag, Evie. I gave it to your mother." In the cockpit, Evelyn pressed her eyes closed against the tears she refused to let fall. "I know," she whispered. "I know you did, Jake, and I am so sorry." If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. Every like helps us bring more incredible military stories to your feed. And stick around, because what Evelyn does next? It is the kind of move that made her a legend in classified circles. The MiGs are closing in, and the real Widowmaker is about to wake up. In the first-class cabin, the news spread like wildfire through dry brush. "Did you hear what they said on the radio? Widowmaker, what does that mean?" Someone said it is a call sign, a military call sign. Marcus Stantain had gone very still. His face, which had been flushed with anger moments before, was now the color of old paper. "Widowmaker," he repeated, his voice hollow. "No, that cannot be." Derek looked at him with confusion. "What? What is Widowmaker?" But Marcus was not listening. He was staring at the cockpit door with an expression that might have been horror, might have been awe, might have been both. "Widowmaker," he said again, "is the call sign of the only female ace pilot in modern American history. 7 confirmed kills over Syria and the South China Sea. She was a legend, a ghost, the kind of pilot that other pilots told stories about." "Was?" Derek pressed. "She died 3 years ago. Classified mission. We lost the entire flight. 3 pilots gone in a single night." Marcus's voice had dropped to barely a whisper. "The Air Force gave her a posthumous Navy Cross. There is a plaque with her name at Nellis." "But if she is dead..." Marcus did not answer. He was still staring at the cockpit door, his mind refusing to process what his ears had heard. Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell had risen from her seat, her aged face illuminated with something like recognition. "Widowmaker," she said softly. "My husband mentioned that name, years ago. He said she reminded him of the pilots from his generation. The ones who flew like the airplane was part of their body." Master Sergeant Ortega nodded slowly. He had pieced it together minutes ago, from the napkin fold to the combat maneuvers to the way she handled stress. "Some ghosts," he said quietly, "refuse to stay buried." Senator Ashford had recovered enough to pull out her phone, frantically scrolling through what appeared to be classified briefing documents. Widowmaker," her face went pale as she found what she was looking for. "Oh my God, I signed the citation for her Navy Cross. I gave a speech at the Pentagon ceremony. And that woman, that flight attendant, she looked up at the cockpit door with new eyes. I called her incompetent, she whispered. I laughed when they mocked her. The irony was not lost on anyone in earshot. In the cockpit, Evelyn was dealing with the aftermath of her revelation while simultaneously flying a commercial aircraft toward Kadena Air Base. How? Jake's voice crackled through the radio, steadier now but still thick with emotion. How are you alive? We searched for weeks. We found wreckage, identification, DNA. You found what they wanted you to find. Evelyn's voice was flat, professional, discussing her own death as if it were a tactical briefing. The mission was compromised, Jake. Someone leaked our position. By the time I realized what was happening, Torres and Chen were already gone. But how did you survive? I ejected at 200 feet, hit the water, and swam to a fishing boat crewed by people who had more interest in staying out of government affairs than reporting a half-dead American pilot. She paused. I spent 6 weeks recovering in a village that does not appear on any map. By the time I was well enough to make contact, I had figured out that someone wanted me dead. Someone with enough access to compromise a classified mission. So you stayed dead. It was safer. For me, for my family, for everyone I cared about. As long as Widowmaker was in the ground, whoever betrayed us would stop looking. Jake was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with radio distortion. 3 years, Evie, 3 years I thought you were gone. Do you have any idea what that did to all of us? Yes. The word was barely audible. I know exactly what it did. I watched from the shadows, Jake. I saw the memorial. I saw you speak. I saw my mother accept that flag. Then why? Why not come back? Because the traitor is still out there, and until I find them, coming back would just paint a target on everyone I care about. The F-22s maintained their escort position, steady guardians in a sky that had nearly become a grave. Does the Air Force know you are alive? Jake asked. No one knows, not officially. She paused. At least they did not until about 3 minutes ago. Well, they are going to know now. The brass is going to have questions. I know. And so will Intel, and the investigators who closed your case, and about 17 different agencies who really do not like it when dead pilots turn up flying commercial aircraft. I know. Jake's sigh was audible even through the radio static. What the hell were you doing on a commercial flight, Evie? Of all the ways to stay hidden. It kept me close to the sky. Her voice softened almost imperceptibly. I could not fly fighters anymore. Too visible, too traceable. But, being a flight attendant, no one looks twice at the woman serving coffee. I could travel, observe, investigate, and when I needed to run, an airline employee can disappear into any airport in the world. That is the most insane operational security I have ever heard of. It worked for 3 years. Until today. Until today. Evelyn watched the approaching coastline through the windscreen. Something forced my hand, Jake. Those MiGs did not stumble onto us by accident. They knew exactly where to find this flight. They knew when we would be in international airspace. They knew our route, our timing, everything. You think someone tipped them off? I think whoever wanted me dead 3 years ago just tried again. And this time, they did not care if they took 270 innocent people with me. The implication hung in the air, heavy and dark. You think the traitor is still active? Jake said slowly. You think they knew you were on this flight. I think there are questions that need answers. And I think some of those answers might be sitting in the first-class cabin right now. Morrison, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally found his voice. Are you saying someone on this plane is trying to kill you? Evelyn did not answer directly. Instead, she said, Kadena is coming up. Let us get these people on the ground safely first. Then we can sort out who knew what and when. Widowmaker, Jake said, using her call sign with something approaching reverence. Whatever happens when we land, I have got your back. You know that, right? I know, Reaper, and Jake, thank you for everything you said at that memorial. My mother told me, she said you made her proud. A pause. She told you? I visited her last year, in disguise. She did not know it was me, but I needed to see her, to make sure she was okay. That is, Jake's voice broke slightly, that is both the most heartbreaking and most badass thing I have ever heard. That is me in a nutshell. Despite everything, a ghost of a smile crossed Evelyn's face. It was the first time she had smiled in longer than she could remember. The coastline of Okinawa appeared on the horizon, the runway of Kadena Air Base visible as a gray ribbon against the green landscape. Emergency vehicles were already gathering, their lights flashing in anticipation of what was about to land. Delta 7742 Kadena Tower. You are cleared for approach runway 05 left. Emergency services standing by. Be advised, you have quite the welcome committee waiting. Copy Kadena, beginning approach. Evelyn guided the massive aircraft toward the runway, her touch on the controls light and assured. After years of fighter jets, the Boeing felt like flying a living room couch through the sky, but there was something meditative about its bulk, something reassuring about its stability. She had missed this. Not the crisis, not the danger, but the flying, the sense of being part of something larger than herself, of controlling thousands of pounds of metal and fuel and physics through nothing but skill and will. Widowmaker, Jake said as they crossed the threshold, welcome home. The wheels touched down with barely a bump, the smoothest landing Morrison had ever experienced. He watched in awe as Evelyn guided the aircraft to the designated parking spot, where a small army of emergency responders waited. But it was not the paramedics that drew attention. It was the line of military personnel standing at rigid attention near the terminal building, officers in dress uniforms, enlisted in formation, a color guard with flags that snapped it in the Pacific breeze, and at the front of them all, a man with 2 stars on his shoulders and an expression of someone who had just seen a ghost walk out of legend. Is that? Morrison started. Major General Vincent Hayes, Evelyn said quietly. Pacific Air Force's deputy commander. He pinned my first Distinguished Flying Cross on me 8 years ago. The aircraft came to a complete stop. The engines wound down with a diminishing whine, and for a moment, everything was perfectly still. Then Evelyn stood, smoothed her wrinkled Delta uniform, and walked toward the cockpit door. Wait, Morrison said, rising from his seat. What happens now? What do I tell people? What do I tell the company? Evelyn paused with her hand on the door handle. Tell them the truth. A flight attendant remembered her training and did what needed to be done. That is not the truth. No. She looked back at him with eyes that carried 3 years of ghosts. But it is the only truth that matters right now. She opened the door. The first-class cabin had fallen silent. Every face turned toward her, every eye fixed on the woman who had saved their lives. Marcus Stanton stood near his seat, his expression a complicated mixture of shame and awe. Derek Holloway had slumped in his chair, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Senator Ashford was frozen mid-step, her political instincts completely overwhelmed by the reality of what she was witnessing. Evelyn walked through them all without acknowledgement. She passed Mrs. Mitchell, who reached out and gently touched her arm. My husband would have been proud, the old woman whispered. And so am I. She passed Master Sergeant Ortega, who rose to his feet and snapped a salute so sharp it could have cut glass. Ma'am? She passed Tyler Brooks, the young private, who was crying openly and did not seem to care who saw. She passed Amy Nguyen, who simply smiled and said, I always knew you were something special, Evie. And then she reached the main cabin door, where a boarding stairway had been positioned by the ground crew. Beyond that door lay a world that had believed her dead for 3 years. A world full of questions she was not ready to answer, explanations she did not want to give, and consequences she could not predict. She took a breath and stepped into the light. The Pacific sun was warm on her face, a stark contrast to the recycled air of the aircraft cabin. Below, on the tarmac, the formation of military personnel had not moved. They stood like statues, waiting. Evelyn descended the stairs slowly, each step taking her further from the anonymity she had built and closer to the identity she had tried to leave behind. Major General Hayes watched her approach with an expression that was impossible to read. He was older than she remembered, more gray at the temples, more lines around his eyes. But his bearing was unchanged, the ramrod posture of a career officer who had spent 4 decades serving his country. She stopped 10 feet from him and came to attention, not consciously, just automatic, her body remembering protocols that her mind had tried to forget. General Hayes, she said. Major Hartwell. He paused. Or should I say, Lieutenant Colonel. Your promotion came through while you were dead. Seemed inappropriate to announce it at the time. Understandable, sir. Hayes studied her for a long moment. His expression flickered through a dozen emotions, too quickly to identify. Then he did something that shocked everyone watching. He smiled. "You know," he said, his voice carrying across the silent tarmac, "when I got the call that a commercial airliner was being intercepted by hostile aircraft and someone had taken control and was flying it like a fighter jet, I had exactly one thought. Sir, I thought, there is only one person crazy enough to try that, and she is dead." He shook his head slowly. "Should have known better than to count you out, Widowmaker." Behind Hayes, the formation rippled. Word was spreading through the ranks, the name passing from lip to lip like a secret too wonderful to contain. "Widowmaker, she is alive. Widowmaker is alive." Hayes stepped forward and, in full view of his staff and the gathered personnel, embraced her. It was brief, barely professional, but it spoke volumes to everyone watching. "Welcome home, Evelyn," he said quietly, too low for anyone else to hear. "We have a lot to talk about." "Yes, sir, we do." When he stepped back, his professional mask was firmly back in place. "You will, of course, need to be debriefed. There are questions about your disappearance, your activities over the past 3 years, and the circumstances of this incident. I understand. And there will be administrative matters, your status, your rank, your security clearances. It is going to be a mess." "I expected nothing less," Hayes nodded. "For now, medical is standing by to check you over, and we have a VIP suite prepared where you can rest until we begin formal proceedings." He paused, "though I suspect rest is the last thing on your mind. There are things I need to tell you, sir, about the original mission, about how it was compromised, about why I stayed hidden." "I assumed as much." Hayes's expression hardened. "The intelligence community has been operating under certain assumptions for 3 years. If those assumptions are wrong, they are wrong, sir. Very wrong. Then we will make them right." Hayes gestured toward a waiting vehicle. "But first, let us get you off this tarmac before the press figures out what is happening. The last thing we need is your resurrection being announced via Twitter." Evelyn nodded and began walking toward the vehicle, but she paused at the edge of the formation, turning to face the assembled personnel who had turned out to witness her arrival. They were young, most of them, young pilots, young officers, young enlisted. The next generation of warriors, standing at attention for a ghost they had only heard about in whispered stories. She drew herself to full height, which was not particularly impressive, and snapped a salute that was. The formation returned it as one, the sound of 200 hands rising in unison like a breaking wave. Then she turned and continued toward the vehicle, leaving the formation behind. But she did not leave the first-class cabin behind so easily. Behind her, passengers were beginning to emerge from the aircraft, blinking in the unfamiliar sunlight, processing what they had experienced. Marcus Stanton walked down the stairs like a man in a trance, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. Derek Holloway followed, silent for perhaps the first time in his adult life. Senator Ashford emerged last, her phone already pressed to her ear, no doubt coordinating spin with her staff. But even she could not quite manage to look away from the slight figure walking across the tarmac with a general at her side. 3 years of mockery, 3 years of being treated as invisible, as incompetent, as beneath notice. And it turned out she had been a hero all along. We are in at the final stretch now, and if you have made it this far, you are one of us. Drop a comment below telling me what branch of the military you served in, or if you have a veteran in your family you want to honor. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Now let us see how Widowmaker finishes what she started 30,000 feet in the sky. The debriefing room at Kadena was aggressively institutional, all gray walls and fluorescent lights and the faint scent of military-grade cleaning solution. Evelyn sat at a metal table across from General Hayes and 2 officers she did not recognize, a woman in intelligence insignia and a man in JAG regalia. They had been at this for 4 hours. "Let me make sure I understand correctly," the intelligence officer said, her voice carefully neutral. "You are claiming that Operation Nightfall was compromised from within, that someone with high-level access deliberately leaked your flight plan to hostile forces, resulting in the deaths of 2 pilots and your presumed death." "I am not claiming anything," Evelyn replied. "I am stating facts. Torres and Chen were dead before they even knew we were under attack. The ambush was surgical. They knew our approach vector, our timing, our frequencies. That is not luck, that is intelligence. And you have spent 3 years investigating this alleged breach?" Yes. While posing as a flight attendant, among other covers. The flight attendant identity gave me mobility and access to commercial aviation databases that would have been difficult to reach otherwise. The JAG officer leaned forward. You are aware that by failing to report your survival to your chain of the command, you have technically been AWOL for 3 years. That carries serious consequences. I am aware. And you accept those consequences? Evelyn met his eyes without flinching. I accept whatever consequences are deemed appropriate, but I would remind the colonel that I stayed hidden because someone in our intelligence apparatus is compromised. Coming back would have painted a target on myself and everyone I care about. Hayes interjected. The question of disciplinary action can wait. Right now, I am more interested in what you have learned during your independent investigation. Evelyn reached into her pocket and produced a small flash drive. 3 years of documentation. Communications intercepts, financial trails, personnel movements. I do not have the name of the traitor, but I have narrowed it down to 6 possibilities. All of them have access to classified mission planning. All of them were involved with Operation Nightfall at some level. The intelligence officer took the drive with an expression of carefully controlled interest. We will need to verify this information independently. I would expect nothing less. And you believe one of these 6 individuals arranged for today's incident, the MiG intercept? I believe the timing is too coincidental to be accidental. This was my first flight on this particular route in 18 months. Someone knew I would be on board. Hayes leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. You are suggesting that whoever compromised Nightfall 3 years ago has been tracking you ever since. Not tracking, waiting. They knew I survived. They knew I was investigating, and today they made their move. But why now? Why after 3 years of silence? Evelyn was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. Because I am getting close. Something I uncovered recently must have spooked them, made them decide that the risk of exposure outweighed the risk of action. What did you uncover? A financial transaction, routed through 6 shell companies across 4 continents. But when you trace it back far enough, it connects to a defense contractor with ties to one of my 6 suspects. The room fell silent. Which contractor? Hayes asked quietly. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Stanton Defense Consulting. The name hung in the air like smoke. Marcus Stanton, the intelligence officer said. The CEO who was on your flight today. The same? You think Marcus Stanton is the traitor? I think Marcus Stanton is connected to the traitor. Whether he is the source or simply the conduit, I do not know yet. But his presence on that flight, combined with the timing of the intercept... She shook her head. There are too many coincidences. Hayes stood and walked to the window, looking out at the runway where the Boeing still sat surrounded by investigators. Marcus Stanton is one of the most prominent defense contractors in the Pacific Theater, he said slowly. His company has contracts with half the intelligence agencies in Washington. If he is compromised, then we have a very serious problem, Evelyn finished. We have a very serious problem regardless. Hayes turned back to face her. You have just accused a major defense contractor of treason based on circumstantial evidence and 3 years of amateur investigation. His lawyers will have a field day. I am not interested in lawyers. I am interested in finding out who killed my wingmen and who just tried to kill 270 innocent people to get to me. The passion in her voice surprised everyone, including herself. For 3 years she had kept her emotions locked away, hidden behind the mask of civilian anonymity. But being back in uniform, surrounded by the machinery of military justice, brought everything rushing back. Torres, Chen, the screaming of missile locks and the flash of fire, the long swim through dark water with a dislocated shoulder and fragments of her canopy still embedded in her flight suit. The weeks of fever and delirium, cared for by fishermen who spoke no English but understood enough to keep her alive. And then the slow, burning realization that someone she trusted had sold her out. There is another possibility we need to consider, the intelligence officer said carefully. What if today's incident was not about eliminating you, but about flushing you out? Evelyn looked at her. Explain. You said you have been careful, hidden, invisible for 3 years, but now everyone knows you are alive. Your identity is going to be impossible to contain. Within 24 hours, your resurrection will be international news. So the traitor accomplished their goal even though I survived. Exactly. They did not need to kill you, they just needed to expose you. The realization settled over Evelyn like a cold weight. 3 years of careful planning, of building cover identities and cultivating sources and staying in the shadows. All of it wiped away in a single morning. She was visible again, vulnerable, exactly where someone wanted her. Then we use that, she said finally. If they wanted me exposed, let us give them what they want. Let me be visible, let me be public, and let us see who comes out of the woodwork to finish what they started. Hayes raised an eyebrow. You are suggesting using yourself as bait? I am suggesting that hiding has not worked. Maybe it is time to try something different. The room was quiet as everyone processed the implications. It would be extraordinarily dangerous, the JAG officer said. I have been in danger for 3 years. At least this way, the danger serves a purpose. Hayes studied her for a long moment, the weight of decision evident in his expression. I will need to consult with Washington, he said finally. This is bigger than one air base commander. But Evelyn, he paused, using her first name deliberately. Whatever happens next, I want you to know something. What you did today, saving that aircraft, saving those passengers, that is what we trained you to do. That is who you are. And nothing, not 3 years of hiding, not a fake death, not a closet full of flight attendant uniforms, can change that. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of tension she had not even realized she was carrying. Thank you, sir. Do not thank me yet. We have a long road ahead. He glanced at the intelligence officer. Have Stanton detained for questioning, quietly. I do not want him making any phone calls until we have had a chance to examine his recent communications. Yes, sir. And get me a secure line to the Pentagon. The secretary is going to want to hear about this personally. As the officers filed out, Hayes lingered at the door. One more thing, Evelyn. That young F-22 pilot, Lieutenant Williams, he is waiting outside, been there for hours. Will not leave until he sees you. Jake. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Send him in. Hayes nodded and departed, leaving the door slightly ajar. A moment later, it swung open fully, and Jake Williams stepped through. He looked older than she remembered. Not much older, just enough to show that 3 years had passed. His face still carried the boyish quality that had made him the favorite of every instructor at Top Gun. But there were new lines around his eyes, new weight in his shoulders, the weight of grief, she realized, the weight of carrying her memory for 3 years. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood across from each other, two pilots who had once flown wing to wing, separated by death and time and impossible circumstances. Then Jake crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped his arms around her. The embrace was fierce, almost painful, the kind of hug that tried to compress years of loss and relief into a single moment. Evelyn stood rigid at first, unaccustomed to physical contact after so long in hiding. But slowly, gradually, she allowed herself to return it. I thought you were dead, Jake said into her hair. I thought you were dead, and it was my fault because I was not there. I was not flying that night. I should have been there. It would not have mattered, Evelyn said quietly. You would have died too. Maybe, but at least I would have died trying to save you. That is exactly what Torres and Chen did, and they are still gone. Jake pulled back, his hands still on her shoulders, his eyes searching her face. 3 years, Evie. 3 years of thinking about what I should have said, what I should have done. And now you are here, and you have been alive this whole time, and I do not know whether to be angry or relieved or both. Be both, I would be. A laugh escaped him, hoarse and broken. You always did know how to give permission for complicated emotions. It is one of my many talents. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history filling the space between them. What happened up there? Jake finally asked. When you got on that radio, when you said your call sign, I thought I was hallucinating. I thought maybe I had finally cracked after years of wishing you were still alive. I did not plan to reveal myself, but when I saw those MiGs, when I realized what was happening, Evelyn shook her head. 300 people were going to die, Jake. Innocent people who had never done anything except buy a plane ticket. I could not let that happen, not when I had the skills to stop it. So you took control of a commercial aircraft and flew it like a fighter jet. It was not my finest hour in terms of passenger comfort. Evie, that was the most incredible flying I have ever seen, and I have seen a lot of flying. She smiled slightly. I had good teachers. You had the best teachers, and then you became better than all of them. The compliment hung in the air, genuine and unforced. What happens now? Jake asked. You cannot just go back to being a flight attendant. No, that cover is blown. So, what then? Back to the Air Force? Back to fighting? Evelyn walked to the window, looking out at the runway where aircraft were constantly landing and taking off. The rhythm of military aviation, the pulse of power projection. I spent 3 years hiding, she said quietly. 3 years pretending to be nobody. And all that time someone was out there, walking free after getting my friends killed. The traitor. The traitor. She turned to face him. I am done hiding, Jake. I am done pretending to be something I am not. Whoever sold us out, whoever is responsible for Torres and Chen, they are going to face justice. And you are going to be the one to deliver it. I am going to be the one to find them. Justice is above my pay grade. Jake nodded slowly. You know I am in, right? Whatever you need, whatever you are planning, I am with you. I know, I am counting on it. A knock at the door interrupted them. A young airman stood in the doorway, looking nervous. Ma'am, sir, General Hayes asked me to inform you that there has been a development. Mr. Stanton has been detained as ordered, but he is requesting to speak with the pilot. Evelyn and Jake exchanged glances. He wants to talk to me specifically? Yes, ma'am. He says he has information about the intercept. About... The airman hesitated. About Operation Nightfall. The name hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Marcus Stanton knew about Nightfall, a classified operation that even most senior officers had never heard of. An operation that had supposedly ended with the deaths of 3 pilots and the closure of an entire intelligence program. How did a defense contractor know that name? Tell the general I will be there in 5 minutes, Evelyn said. The airman nodded and departed. Jake looked at her with concern. You sure about this? Stanton is connected. If he is the traitor, then I want to look him in the eye when I ask him why. Evelyn straightened her borrowed flight suit, the closest thing to a uniform she had worn in 3 years. And if he is not the traitor, then maybe he knows who is. Want me to come with you? No, this is something I need to do alone. She walked to the door, then paused, looking back at Jake. Thank you for what you said at the memorial, for taking care of my mother, for being the kind of friend who carries someone's memory even when they are gone. Jake's smile was sad but genuine. You were never gone, Evie. Not really. You were always there, in every formation, every mission, every toast to fallen pilots. Widowmaker never died. She just waited. Evelyn nodded once, unable to trust her voice. Then she walked out of the room, heading toward whatever truth Marcus Stanton had to offer. The holding room, where they had placed Marcus Stanton, was spare and utilitarian, designed to be uncomfortable without being explicitly punitive. He sat at a metal table, his expensive suit rumpled, his silver hair disheveled, his entire demeanor transformed from the imperious CEO who had mocked a flight attendant to something smaller, more uncertain. When Evelyn entered, he looked up, and for a moment she saw genuine fear in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the careful mask of a man who had spent decades negotiating impossible situations. Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell, he said, his voice steady despite everything. Or should I say, Widowmaker. Evelyn sat across from him, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. You asked to speak with me specifically. You mentioned Nightfall. I am listening. Marcus studied her for a long moment. You know, I watched you serve drinks for 3 hours on that flight. 3 hours of wondering why the coffee girl seemed wrong somehow. The way you moved, the way you watched everything. I could not put my finger on it. Get to the point, Mr. Stanton. The point, he laughed bitterly. The point is that I spent 30 years building a company on government contracts and military intelligence, and in all that time, I never once realized that the most dangerous person in any room might be wearing an apron and asking about dietary restrictions. Flattery will not help you right now. It is not flattery. It is respect. Marcus leaned forward. And fear. Because if you are who I think you are, then I have been a pawn in someone else's game for a very long time. Evelyn's expression did not change. Explain? 3 months ago, I received a communication. Anonymous, heavily encrypted, routed through servers that my own security team could not trace. The message was simple. It contained a flight number, a date, and instructions to be on that flight in first class. Today's flight. Yes. The message said that if I was on that plane, I would learn something valuable, Something about a competitor who was about to receive a massive contract that should have gone to my company. And you just followed the instructions? No questions asked? Of course I had questions, but whoever sent that message knew things they should not have known. Personal things, business secrets, information that only someone with very high-level access could have obtained. Marcus's voice hardened. They made it clear that cooperating was in my best interest. So you were manipulated onto that flight. That does not explain how you know about Nightfall. Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because the same entity that sent me those instructions has been feeding my company intelligence for the past 3 years. Information that has given us an edge over every competitor in the defense sector. Contracts we should not have won. Insights we should not have had. You have been receiving classified intelligence from an anonymous source? Not just receiving, profiting. Massively. He met her eyes. I am not proud of it, but in my business you do not question where the edge comes from. You just use it. Evelyn felt her jaw tighten. And you never thought to report this to the authorities? Report what? That someone was helping my company succeed? That would be like a gambler reporting that they kept winning. Nobody looks a gift horse in the mouth. People died because of what you are describing. American pilots, my friends. Marcus flinched. I did not know. Not until today. Not until I heard your call sign on that radio and put the pieces together. 3 years ago, my company received a contract to analyze patterns in enemy communication intercepts. One of those patterns, he paused, one of those patterns was the flight trajectory that your squadron was using for Nightfall. The room seemed to shrink. You are telling me, Evelyn said slowly, each word precisely controlled, that your company had access to classified operational data for my mission? I am telling you that someone gave us that access. Someone who wanted us to see it, to use it, to analyze it for vulnerabilities. Marcus's face had gone gray. I did not know what it was for. I thought it was a security exercise, a test to see if commercial contractors could identify weaknesses in military planning. It was not a test. No, it was bait. And I took it. Evelyn stood abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. She walked to the wall and pressed her palms against the cold surface, fighting to keep her composure. 3 years. 3 years of hunting shadows, of building theories, of looking for the traitor in military intelligence. And all along, the leak had come through a defense contractor who was too greedy to ask questions and too connected to face consequences. Who sent you those communications? She asked without turning around. Who is your source? I do not know. I have spent 3 months trying to trace them, ever since I started suspecting that I was being used. Whoever they are better at this than anyone I have ever encountered. Then how do I find them? Marcus hesitated. There is one thing, one piece of information that might help. Evelyn turned. Tell me. The original message, 3 months ago, the one that told me to be on this flight, it was signed. Signed how? Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, moving slowly to avoid alarming any observers, and produced a creased piece of paper. The security team that detained me let me keep this. They did not think it was relevant. He slid it across the table. Evelyn picked it up, her eyes scanning the printed text. Standard threatening language, instructions, warnings. Nothing unusual until the bottom of the page. There, in bold type, was a single word. Phoenix. The world tilted. Phoenix. She knew that name. Everyone in the intelligence community knew that name. Phoenix was the code name for a high-level mole that the CIA had been hunting for over a decade. A ghost in the system, selling American secrets to the highest bidder. A figure so well hidden that some analysts had concluded Phoenix was not a single person, but an entire network of compromised assets. And now that name was connected to the deaths of her wingmen, to 3 years of hiding, to the attempt on 270 lives. You understand what this means? Marcus asked quietly. If Phoenix is real, if they are the one who has been feeding me intelligence, then this is bigger than Nightfall, Evelyn finished. Bigger than one compromised mission. Bigger than anything I was prepared for. She stared at the paper for a long moment, her mind racing through implications. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Mr. Stanton, she said, her voice calm despite the earthquake happening inside her, you are going to tell the investigators everything you just told me. Every detail, every communication, every piece of intelligence you received. You are going to cooperate fully with whatever investigation follows. And if I do, then maybe you walk away from this with your freedom intact, but your company is finished. Your contracts are gone. The empire you built on blood money and borrowed secrets ends today. Marcus nodded slowly, the fight draining out of him. I suppose I deserve that. You deserve worse, but justice is not about what people deserve. It is about what keeps others safe. Evelyn walked to the door. For what it is worth, you probably did not know what you were part of. That does not excuse it, but it does explain it. You were a tool, Mr. Stanton. A very profitable, very willing tool, but a tool nonetheless. And Phoenix? Evelyn paused with her hand on the door handle. Phoenix has been hiding for a decade. They have compromised operations across 3 continents. They have cost countless lives and billions in intelligence value. She turned to look at him one last time. But they made a mistake today. They came after me. They came after innocent civilians. They showed their hand. What are you going to do? Evelyn's smile was cold and certain. I am going to find them. And I am going to end this, whatever it takes, however long it takes. She opened the door and stepped through. Behind her, Marcus Stanton sat alone in the cold room, contemplating the ruins of everything he had built. And somewhere, in the shadows of the intelligence world, a figure known only as Phoenix felt the first tremor of something they had never experienced before. Fear. Because Widowmaker was alive, and she was hunting. The sun was setting over Kadena Air Base, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson that reminded Evelyn of fire, of explosions, of the night 3 years ago when her world had ended and begun again in the span of 60 seconds. She stood at the window of the VIP suite they had assigned her, watching F-22s taxi toward the runway for evening patrol. The familiar silhouette stirred something deep in her chest, a longing she had tried to bury beneath layers of civilian life and careful anonymity. She had flown those aircraft, had pushed them to their limits and beyond, had felt the rush of air at Mach 2 and the terrible intimacy of combat at distances measured in hundreds of meters. And then she had given it all up to become invisible. A knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. Enter. General Hayes stepped through, his expression grave. Behind him came Jake Williams and a woman Evelyn did not recognize, tall and lean with intelligence insignia on her collar and the careful eyes of someone who had spent years reading people instead of trusting them. Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell, Hayes said formally, this is Colonel Patricia Vasquez. She commands our AWACS operations in the Pacific Theater. Evelyn turned from the window, recognition flickering across her features. Iron Lady, you were the voice on the radio during the intercept. Vasquez nodded once. I recognized your flight profile before you said your call sign. No commercial pilot flies like that. No military pilot flies like that, except maybe half a dozen people in the world, and 3 of them are supposed to be dead. Only one of us actually stayed dead. Apparently not even that. Vasquez's expression softened slightly. It is good to see you alive, Widowmaker. Your memorial was one of the hardest funerals I ever attended. I am sorry I could not be there. Yes, well, Vasquez managed a thin smile. I suppose you had a good excuse. Hayes cleared his throat. We have a situation. The information you provided about Phoenix has created significant concern at the highest levels. I have been on secure calls with Washington for the past 2 hours. And they want to move fast. If Phoenix is as embedded as we suspect, every hour that passes gives them more time to cover their tracks, burn sources, disappear. Evelyn nodded slowly. What are they proposing? A joint task force, CIA, NSA, Air Force Intelligence, with operational support from Special Operations Command. Hayes paused. They want you to lead it. The words hung in the air like smoke. Me? You know more about Phoenix's operational patterns than anyone alive. You have spent 3 years studying their methods, their connections, their vulnerabilities, and frankly, Hayes's voice hardened. You have more motivation than anyone to see this through. What about my status? Last I checked, I was technically AWOL, a ghost, possibly facing court-martial. The Secretary of Defense has signed an emergency authorization restoring your active duty status with full rank and privileges. Your absence is being classified as a deep cover operation conducted under special authority. Hayes's lip twitched in what might have been amusement. Welcome back to the United States Air Force, Lieutenant Colonel. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. 3 years of hiding, 3 years of building a careful fiction, and now, in the span of hours, she was being thrust back into the world she had left behind, given authority she had never expected, tasked with hunting the ghost that had destroyed her life. What resources do I have? Whatever you need, personnel, equipment, intelligence access, the full weight of the American military and intelligence apparatus is at your disposal. And Stanton, being processed for full cooperation. His company is being quietly dismantled as we speak. The contracts are being reassigned, the assets frozen, the entire operation sealed pending investigation. Hayes's expression hardened. He will not profit from what he did, but the information he provides could be invaluable. Evelyn walked back to the window, her reflection ghostly against the darkening sky. "There is something you are not telling me," she said without turning around. "Something about why Washington is moving so fast." Silence. Then Hayes sighed. "You always were too perceptive for your own good." "General, we intercepted a communication 4 hours ago, encrypted, routed through the same network Stanton described. It was brief, just a few words, but the implications—" "What did it say?" Hayes reached into his pocket and produced a folded paper. "See for yourself." Evelyn took the paper and read the single sentence printed on it. "The widow returns. Initiate final protocol." Her blood ran cold. "They know," she whispered. "Phoenix knows I am alive, and they are making their move. Whatever final protocol means, we have to assume it is designed to eliminate any evidence of Phoenix's existence. Sources, contacts, documents, everything that could lead back to them. Including me, especially you." Evelyn folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket alongside the first message. 2 pieces of a puzzle that stretched across years and continents, bound together by blood and betrayal. "Then we do not have time to waste," she said. "I need access to every piece of intelligence Stanton provided. Every communication, every financial record, every contact he ever had with his anonymous source, already being compiled. I need a team. People I can trust absolutely. People who are not compromised. Colonel Vasquez has volunteered to handle communications and coordination. Lieutenant Williams has requested assignment to your unit." Evelyn glanced at Jake, who met her eyes steadily. "I told you I was in, whatever you need. This is not a flying mission, Jake. This is intelligence work, hunting shadows. Then I will learn to hunt shadows. I am not letting you face this alone. Not again." The conviction in his voice left no room for argument. "Fine." Evelyn turned back to Hayes. "What about operational security? If Phoenix is as connected as we believe, they could have eyes and ears anywhere. We are operating under the assumption that standard channels are compromised. All communications will go through specially encrypted systems that Vasquez's team has developed, face-to-face meetings only for sensitive information, no digital trails that can be traced. And the passengers from the flight, the witnesses, being debriefed and processed. Most will be released within 24 hours, with strong suggestions to keep quiet about what they saw. The ones who know your identity—" Hayes paused. "That is more complicated. Let me guess, Marcus Stanton, Derek Holloway, Senator Ashford, and a handful of others who heard enough to piece things together. Among others, Master Sergeant Ortega has already agreed to sign non-disclosure agreements. Mrs. Mitchell is elderly and not particularly connected to media outlets. The young private, Tyler Brooks, has been given orders to maintain operational silence. And the VIPs? More difficult. Stanton is cooperating for obvious reasons. Holloway is being handled through his father, who has been read into enough of the situation to understand the stakes. The senator— let me guess, she wants something. She wants a lot of things. Primarily, she wants to be involved. She says her position on the Armed Services Committee gives her oversight authority." Evelyn laughed bitterly. 4 hours ago, she was laughing at me for spilling champagne. Now she wants oversight authority over my operation. Politics does not change just because the stakes are life and death. No, I suppose it does not. She turned from the window finally, her decision crystallizing in her mind. Keep Ashford out of the operational details. Give her enough briefings to feel important, but nothing that could compromise the mission if it leaks. Stanton continues cooperating under supervision. Holloway goes home and keeps his mouth shut. And if they do not comply? Evelyn's smile was thin and cold. Then remind them that I just flew a commercial aircraft through a hostile intercept while they were screaming for someone to save them. Remind them that I could have let those MiGs shoot us down. Remind them that every breath they take from this moment forward is because I chose to act when they could not. Hayes nodded slowly. Understood. Good. Now, let us get to work. Phoenix has had a head start for 3 years. It is time we started catching up. The operations center had been set up in a secure facility on the far side of the base, away from the main buildings and protected by layers of physical and electronic security. Inside, a team of analysts worked at terminals, processing the flood of data that Stanton's cooperation had unleashed. Evelyn stood before a wall of screens displaying financial transactions, communication intercepts, personnel files, and geographic data. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming, a testament to how deeply Phoenix had embedded themselves in the intelligence community. Walk me through what we know, she said. Colonel Vasquez stepped forward, her tablet glowing with data. Phoenix has been active for at least 12 years, possibly longer. We have confirmed connections to compromised operations in Syria, Afghanistan, the South China Sea, and 3 incidents in Eastern Europe that were previously attributed to other causes. How many American casualties can we trace to their actions? Vasquez hesitated. Preliminary analysis suggests at least 47 direct deaths, possibly more if we include secondary effects from compromised intelligence, 47. Torres and Chen were just 2 names in a much longer list. Financial patterns? This is where it gets interesting. Vasquez pulled up a complex diagram of interconnected accounts and shell companies. Phoenix moves money through a network of entities spread across 14 countries. The amounts are relatively small, never enough to trigger major alerts, but consistent. Over 12 years, we estimate they have received approximately $43 million in payments from various foreign intelligence services. Multiple buyers? Yes. Russian SVR, Chinese MSS, Iranian Vaja, even some non-state actors we are still identifying. Phoenix does not appear to work exclusively for anyone. They sell to whoever pays. Mercenary intelligence, Jake said from his position near the door. The worst kind of traitor. No ideology, no cause, just profit. Which makes them harder to predict but easier to track, Evelyn observed. Money leaves trails, financial records can be subpoenaed, accounts frozen, transactions traced. Normally, yes. Vasquez's expression darkened. But Phoenix has protection, high-level protection. Every time we get close to a financial nexus, someone intervenes. Investigations get shut down. Agents get reassigned. Evidence disappears. Which means Phoenix has assets inside our own intelligence apparatus. At least 3, probably more. We have identified suspicious patterns in the careers of several senior officers, but nothing concrete enough to act on. Evelyn studied the diagram, her mind working through the implications. What about Stanton's contacts? The communications he received? We are tracing them now. The encryption is military grade, routed through servers that should not exist. Whoever built Phoenix's communication network knows exactly what they are doing, or they had help from people who should have been protecting us. The bitterness in Evelyn's voice was unmistakable. A young analyst approached, tablet in hand. Ma'am, we have something. One of the financial threads from Stanton's data connects to a real estate transaction in Hong Kong 3 years ago. The timing coincides with Operation Nightfall. Evelyn took the tablet, scanning the information. A property purchase, anonymous buyer. Payment routed through the same shell company network that connected to Phoenix. What is the property? A warehouse in Kowloon. Registered as a shipping logistics company, but satellite imagery shows minimal actual activity. It has been essentially dormant for the past 2 years. Dormant or waiting? Unknown, ma'am. Evelyn handed the tablet back. Get me everything on that property. Ownership history, utility records, any surveillance footage we can access. I want to know every person who has stepped foot in that building since it was purchased. Yes, ma'am. As the analyst hurried away, Jake moved to stand beside Evelyn. You think that is where they are based? I think it is a piece of the puzzle. Phoenix does not operate from a single location. They are too smart for that. But everyone needs somewhere to store things, to meet contacts, to coordinate operations. That warehouse might be one of their nodes. So we investigate? We investigate everything. Every thread, every connection, every anomaly in the data. Somewhere in this mountain of information is the answer we are looking for. We just have to find it. The night stretched into morning and morning into afternoon. Evelyn worked alongside her team, reviewing data, challenging assumptions, building a picture of Phoenix's operations piece by piece. Coffee cups accumulated on desks. Eyes grew red from staring at screens. But slowly, inexorably, patterns began to emerge. Phoenix was not a single person. The operational signature was too diverse, too geographically spread, too sustained over time for one individual to manage. It was a network, a small one, probably no more than 5 or 6 core members, but coordinated and disciplined. They communicated through a system of dead drops and encrypted channels that changed regularly, never using the same method twice in succession. Their tradecraft was impeccable, the kind of operational security that came from years of experience and intimate knowledge of counterintelligence techniques. "They trained with us," Evelyn said during one of the briefings, her voice flat with certainty. "Whoever is running Phoenix learned their craft from American intelligence. The patterns, the methodology, the way they think. This is not foreign training. This is homegrown," which narrows our suspect pool considerably, Vasquez observed. "How many people have that level of tradecraft and the access Phoenix has demonstrated? Hundreds, maybe thousands over the past 2 decades. CIA, NSA, DIA, military intelligence. Anyone who served at a senior level in any of those organizations could potentially have the skills. That is not narrow at all. No, but it is a start." On the second day, they caught a break. One of the communication traces from Stanton's data led to a server farm in Iceland that specialized in anonymized hosting. The Icelandic authorities, responding to a diplomatic request, allowed American analysts limited access to the facility's records. Most of the data was useless, carefully scrubbed of identifying information. But one log entry had been incompletely deleted, leaving behind a fragment of metadata that pointed to an origin IP address in Virginia. Virginia, home to CIA headquarters, the Pentagon, and countless other intelligence facilities. "The call is coming from inside the house," Jake muttered when he heard the news. "It always was," Evelyn replied. "We just could not prove it until now." The Virginia connection opened new avenues of investigation, cross-referencing the timing of Phoenix's operations with personnel movements, vacation schedules, and travel records began to yield results. 3 names emerged as persons of interest. The first was a former CIA deputy director who had retired 5 years ago, under circumstances that official records described as medical but unofficial channels suggested were more complicated. He had access to the right information at the right times, and his post-retirement consulting work gave him continued connections to the intelligence community. The second was an active-duty colonel in the Defense Intelligence Agency who had served on multiple oversight committees and had been present at briefings for several operations that Phoenix had compromised. His career trajectory showed unusual promotions and assignments that did not quite match his official performance reviews. The third was someone Evelyn knew. "General Robert Chen," Vasquez said, displaying the personnel file on the main screen, "currently serving as Deputy Director of Intelligence for Pacific Command. He was your commanding officer during the Nightfall mission." Evelyn stared at the face on the screen. Gray hair, sharp features, the kind of expression that gave nothing away. She had stood in his office dozens of times, received orders, provided briefings, trusted him with her life and the lives of her wingmen. "He had access to everything," she said quietly. "The flight plans, the timing, the frequencies we would use. If he wanted to compromise Nightfall, he would have had no trouble doing it. But why would he? Chen has been decorated multiple times. His service record is exemplary. He has no financial problems, no foreign connections that we can find. Everyone has something they are hiding. We just have not found his yet." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Evie, are you sure about this? Chen is a 2-star general. Accusing him without solid evidence would end careers, including yours." "I am not accusing anyone. I am investigating. There is a difference." Evelyn turned away from the screen. "But I need to talk to him. Face to face. See how he reacts when he learns I'm alive. That is risky. If he is Phoenix or connected to Phoenix, you would be showing your hand. Phoenix already knows I'm alive. The final protocol message proves that. What they do not know is how much I know or who else is involved." She paused. "A conversation with Chen might tell us something. His reaction, his questions, what he does in the hours after we meet. You want to use yourself as bait again. I want to shake the tree and see what falls out. Vasquez exchanged a glance with Jake, then nodded slowly. I can arrange a meeting. Chen is scheduled to arrive at Pearl Harbor tomorrow for a regional security conference. We could intercept him before his official engagements begin. Do it, and make sure we have surveillance on him before, during, and after. I want to know who he calls, who he meets with, every move he makes from the moment he learns I am alive. Understood. The flight to Hawaii took 4 hours in a military transport that offered comfort roughly equivalent to sitting inside a vibrating metal box. Evelyn spent most of the journey reviewing Chen's file, looking for anything that might indicate betrayal. His career was distinguished, decorations for valor in combat, commendations for leadership, a reputation as someone who took care of his people and did not tolerate incompetence. None of it proved anything. The best traitors were always the ones you would never suspect. Pearl Harbor was humid and crowded with military personnel from half a dozen nations attending the security conference. Evelyn and her small team were met by a liaison officer who escorted them to a secure facility away from the main conference venues. General Chen has been informed that a senior officer wishes to discuss Pacific Theater intelligence matters, the liaison reported. He agreed to the meeting, but seemed curious about the unusual circumstances. I imagine he did. They waited in a conference room that smelled of air conditioning and old coffee. Outside the window, ships rode at anchor in the harbor, their gray hulls gleaming in the tropical sun. The door opened. General Robert Chen entered, flanked by an aide who remained near the entrance. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing erect, his expression professionally neutral. Then he saw Evelyn. For one fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Surprise, certainly, but also something else, something that passed too quickly to identify. Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell, his voice was steady, betraying nothing. I was told you were dead. The reports were exaggerated, sir? Apparently so. Chen moved to the table and sat, his movements controlled and deliberate. I assume you have an explanation for your prolonged absence? Several explanations, sir, none of them simple. They rarely are in our business. He studied her with eyes that had witnessed decades of intelligence operations. The Nightfall mission, I always suspected there was more to that story than the official reports indicated. You suspected correctly. Who else knows you survived? Enough people. The question is not who knows, but who arranged for the mission to fail in the first place. Chen's expression did not change, but his hands shifted slightly on the table. You are suggesting the mission was deliberately compromised. I am not suggesting anything, sir. I have evidence. She produced the paper with Phoenix's signature and slid it across the table. Chen looked at it for a long moment. When he raised his eyes, they were unreadable. Phoenix, he said quietly, you have found a connection to Phoenix. We have found many connections. Financial trails, communication networks, patterns of compromised operations going back more than a decade. And you believe Phoenix was responsible for Nightfall. I believe whoever compromised Nightfall is connected to Phoenix, yes. Chen leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. Do you know how many times I have been briefed on Phoenix? How many task forces I have seen formed and disbanded? How many promising leads have evaporated into nothing? I imagine quite a few, sir. 17. 17 separate efforts to identify and neutralize Phoenix over the past decade. All of them failed. Either the target disappeared, or the evidence turned out to be fabricated, or the investigation was shut down for reasons that were never adequately explained. Which suggests Phoenix has protection at the highest levels. Which suggests, Chen agreed, that finding Phoenix will require more than evidence. It will require catching them in the act, in a situation where their protectors cannot intervene. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. This was either a genuine offer of alliance or an elaborate attempt to understand what she knew. Either way, it was progress. What are you proposing, sir? Chen stood and walked to the window, his reflection ghostly against the glass. I am proposing that we pool our resources. You have fresh eyes and 3 years of independent investigation. I have access to systems and personnel that could accelerate your efforts. And in return? In return, I want to know everything you have discovered. Every lead, every connection, every suspect. He turned to face her, including, I assume, whether I am on that list. The directness caught Evelyn off guard, though she did not show it. Would you be surprised if you were? I would be surprised if I was not. I had access to Nightfall. I signed off on the operational parameters. If the mission was compromised from within, I am an obvious suspect. That is remarkably candid, sir. I am too old for games, Colonel. Either you trust me enough to work together, or you do not. Either way, Phoenix continues to operate, and Americans continue to die. His jaw tightened. I lost good people in Nightfall, too. Torres and Chen were not just names on a casualty report to me. I had recruited Chen myself, watched him develop into one of the finest pilots in the service. And then I had to write letters to his parents, explaining why their son was not coming home. The emotion in his voice seemed genuine, but seeming genuine was what the best operatives did. I need time to consider your offer, Evelyn said finally, and I need to consult with my team. Of course, I would expect nothing less. Chen moved toward the door. But do not take too long. If Phoenix has initiated their final protocol, they are cleaning house. Every hour we delay is another potential source eliminated, another trail erased. He paused at the threshold. For what it is worth, Colonel, I always believed you were the best pilot I ever commanded, the best soldier. The fact that you survived when everyone else died, that you spent 3 years fighting from the shadows, that does not surprise me at all. His expression softened, almost imperceptibly. Welcome back to the fight. Then he was gone. Evelyn sat in silence for a long moment, processing the conversation. What do you think? Jake asked from his position near the door. I think he is either exactly what he appears to be, or he is a much better liar than I am a judge of character. Those are not mutually exclusive options. No, they are not. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the same view Chen had contemplated moments before. Put surveillance on him anyway, full spectrum. I want to know what he does after this meeting, who he contacts, how he reacts to learning that Phoenix's network is being unraveled. And if he is clean, then we apologize later and he becomes our most valuable ally. Evelyn turned from the window. Either way, we learned something. The surveillance on Chen revealed nothing unusual over the next 48 hours. He attended his conference meetings, spoke with the expected colleagues, made no suspicious communications or movements, but something else did happen. On the morning of the third day, Evelyn received word that one of the 3 suspects, the retired CIA deputy director, had been found dead in his home, heart attack, according to preliminary reports. Final protocol was accelerating. We need to move faster, Evelyn said during the emergency briefing. They are eliminating anyone who might be able to identify them. The second suspect, the DIA colonel, has requested emergency leave, Vasquez reported. He claims his mother is ill, but our surveillance shows his mother died 4 years ago. He is running. It appears so. Can we intercept him? FBI is already moving. They should have him in custody within the hour. The DIA colonel, whose name was William Frost, did not make it to custody. His car was found on the side of a Virginia highway, empty, with signs of a struggle. By the time search teams arrived, there was no trace of him. Phoenix got to him first, Jake said grimly. Either recruited him for extraction or eliminated him as a loose end, which means they know we are closing in. Evelyn studied the map showing the location of Frost's abandoned vehicle. They are scared, making mistakes. Frost was taken in broad daylight on a public highway. That is not careful tradecraft. That is desperation. Desperate people are dangerous. Desperate people make errors, and one of those errors is going to lead us directly to them. The error came sooner than expected. Frost's laptop had been left in his car, damaged but recoverable. The forensic team found evidence of a recently deleted file, a communication that had been improperly scrubbed. The message was brief, just coordinates and a time. But the coordinates pointed to a location in rural Maryland, and the time was less than 12 hours away. It could be a trap, Vasquez warned. They know we would recover the laptop. They might be setting us up. Probably, Evelyn studied the map. But it could also be genuine, a meeting location that Frost was supposed to attend before he became a liability. Even if it is genuine, Phoenix will know their plans are compromised. They will not show up. Maybe, or maybe they need this meeting badly enough to risk it. Evelyn made her decision. We go. Full tactical team, surveillance, the works. If it is a trap, we spring it carefully. If it is genuine, we might catch them in the act. The Maryland location turned out to be an abandoned farmhouse surrounded by overgrown fields that had not seen cultivation in decades. The tactical team took positions in the woods around the property, while Evelyn and Jake monitored from a mobile command vehicle parked half a mile away. For hours, nothing happened. The farmhouse sat silent and still, its windows like empty eyes staring into the darkness. Then, just after midnight, headlights appeared on the distant road. "Vehicle approaching," the team leader reported. "Single car, no visible passengers. Hold positions, let them arrive." The car pulled up to the farmhouse and stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened and a figure emerged. Even in the low light, enhanced by night vision equipment, Evelyn recognized the face. It was General Chen. "Chen?" Jake breathed. It was him all along. But something was wrong. Chen was moving strangely, his gait unsteady, his hands raised slightly as if under duress. And there was something behind him, a shadow that had not been visible from the road. A second figure emerged from the car, and suddenly everything made terrible sense. "He is not alone," Evelyn said. "Someone has him at gunpoint." The second figure moved into clearer view, and Evelyn felt her blood turn to ice. She recognized that face too. It was Captain Michael Torres, her wingman, the man who had supposedly died in the Syrian desert 3 years ago. "Torres," she whispered. "Torres is alive." "That is impossible," Jake said. "We recovered his body. We had DNA confirmation." "We recovered a body. DNA can be faked." On the screen, Torres was pushing Chen toward the farmhouse door, a weapon pressed against the general's back. His movements were professional, controlled. The movements of someone who had done this many times before. "Torres is Phoenix," Evelyn said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "He was working with them all along. He compromised Nightfall, killed Chen, and then faked his own death to disappear. But why? He was one of us. He was your friend. Was he? Or was that just another cover, another role he was playing while he sold us out?" She watched as Torres disappeared into the farmhouse with his prisoner, and something cold and hard settled in her chest. For 3 years, she had mourned her wingman, had blamed herself for not being able to save him, had carried his memory like a weight around her heart. And all that time, he had been alive, working for Phoenix, killing Americans. "Team leader," she said into the radio, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her, "we have a hostage situation. One friendly General Chen, held by a hostile who is to be considered extremely dangerous. I am going in." "Ma'am, we should wait for backup. Let the tactical team handle this." "The tactical team does not know Torres like I do. They do not know his patterns, his weaknesses, how he thinks." She was already moving toward the door of the command vehicle. "I am the best chance Chen has." "Evie, this is crazy," Jake said. "Bamam bum oar," Jake said, grabbing her arm. "Torres was one of the best pilots in the Air Force. If he is Phoenix, he has been operating as a covert asset for years. You cannot just walk in there. I am not walking. I am flying." She met his eyes with a calm she did not entirely feel. "Every pilot has their moves, Jake, their signatures. I know Torres is better than anyone. I know how he thinks, how he reacts, how he moves in combat. If I can get close enough, I can use that against him. And if you cannot, then you make sure the tactical team takes him down before he escapes again." She pulled her arm free and stepped out into the night. The farmhouse loomed before her, dark and silent except for a faint glow from one of the windows. Evelyn approached cautiously, her sidearm drawn, her movement silent on the overgrown grass. She could hear voices now, carrying through the thin walls. "Should have killed you years ago," Torres was saying, "but you were useful, a general with access to everything we needed. It was almost too easy." "You are insane." Chen's voice was strained but defiant. "They will find you. They are probably already closing in. Let them come. By the time they breach this building, you will be dead and I will be gone. Another body, another closed case, another mystery that Phoenix leaves behind." Evelyn reached the window and risked a glance inside. Torres stood in the center of what had once been a living room, his weapon trained on Chen, who was tied to a chair. The years had changed her former wingman. His face was harder, colder, the boyish enthusiasm she remembered replaced by something predatory. "Why?" Chen was asking. "Why betray everything you swore to protect?" Torres laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Protect? I protected nothing. I watched this country send good people to die in pointless conflicts while the politicians and generals sat safe in their offices. I watched friends die because someone decided their lives were acceptable losses. So you became the thing you hated. I became something better, something free." Torres's grip tightened on his weapon. Phoenix is not about ideology, General. It is about recognizing that loyalty is a lie we tell ourselves to justify our own exploitation. The only thing that matters is survival, and I have survived for 12 years, while better men than you died around me. Evelyn had heard enough. She moved to the door, tested it quietly. Unlocked. Torres was confident, perhaps too confident. She slipped inside, her footsteps silent on the dusty floor. Including Torres and Chen, she heard Torres continue, or should I say, including a pilot named Chen and a body I procured to take my place. The DNA was the hardest part, but Phoenix has resources. By the time the crash site was investigated, there was enough evidence to convince everyone that Michael Torres died a hero. And Hartwell, she survived. A complication. One that should have been resolved today, but apparently Widow Maker has more lives than a cat. She is going to find you. She has been hunting Phoenix for 3 years. She will not stop until she brings you down. Let her try. By the time she pieces together what happened here tonight, I will be on another continent with a new identity and a very comfortable retirement fund. Evelyn stepped through the doorway into the room. Actually, she said, I am already here. Torres spun, his weapon rising, but Evelyn was already moving. Years of combat training took over, muscle memory guiding her through the motions she had practiced thousands of times. She knocked his gun hand aside just as he fired, the bullet burying itself in the wall. Her elbow connected with his jaw, snapping his head back. She followed with a knee strike that should have dropped him. But Torres was good, better than she remembered. He recovered faster than any normal person should have, his counterattack coming from an angle she barely managed to block. They exchanged blows in the cramped space, furniture shattering around them, dust filling the air. I knew you would come, Torres gasped between strikes. You were always predictable, Evie, always had to be the hero, and you were always a coward hiding behind other people's courage. She landed a hit to his ribs, felt something crack, but he responded with a strike that sent her stumbling backward, her vision blurring. I was the best, Torres snarled. Better than you, better than Chen, better than anyone they paired me with. And what did it get me? Medals I could not spend and a pension that would barely cover rent. Phoenix offered me what this country never did. Appreciation, compensation, freedom. Freedom! Evelyn spat blood and raised her fists again. You call murdering your comrades freedom? I call it business, nothing personal. He attacked again, a combination that she barely managed to deflect. She was tiring, her body protesting after days of limited sleep and constant stress. Torres, whatever else he was, had clearly maintained his physical conditioning, but she had something he did not. 3 years of rage, 3 years of guilt and grief, and burning determination. She channeled it all into one final assault, abandoning defense entirely, accepting the blows he landed in exchange for the ones she delivered. Her fist connected with his throat, her knee found his solar plexus. Her elbow crashed into his temple. Torres went down. He tried to rise, but Evelyn was already on top of him, her knee on his chest, her weapon pressed against his forehead. It is over, she said, her voice ragged but steady. Phoenix is finished. Torres looked up at her, and for a moment, something like his old self flickered in his eyes. The pilot she had flown with, the friend she had mourned. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. You have no idea what you are dealing with, he said. I am just one node. Phoenix is everywhere, in every agency, every branch, every level of government. You cannot kill an idea, Evie. You cannot stop something that has been growing for decades. Watch me. The tactical team burst through the doors, weapons raised, flooding the room with lights and shouted commands. In seconds, Torres was subdued and restrained. General Chen was being freed from his bonds, and Evelyn was being helped to her feet by Jake, who had apparently followed her, despite her orders. That was insane, he said. Absolutely, completely insane. It worked. This time, what about next time? Evelyn looked at Torres, now being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of hatred and defiance. There is not going to be a next time, she said. This ends now. The interrogation of Michael Torres lasted for 3 days. He resisted at first, maintaining his defiance, but the weight of evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, communication logs, testimony from Stanton and others. One by one, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, revealing a network that stretched further than anyone had imagined. Phoenix was not one person, or even one organization. It was a philosophy, a way of operating that had infected elements of the intelligence community for decades. Torres was a senior operative, but there were others, some still active, some already eliminated by the final protocol. The ones we have identified are being rounded up, Hayes reported during a briefing at the Pentagon. 7 arrests so far, with more expected. It is going to take years to fully assess the damage and rebuild the compromised systems. But we stopped them, Jake said. Phoenix is exposed. Phoenix is wounded. Exposed. But as Torres said, you cannot kill an idea. Hayes looked at Evelyn. There will be others. There will always be others who see betrayal as a path to profit. Then we will find them too. Evelyn stood at the window of the Pentagon office, looking out at the capital city spread before her. One at a time, for as long as it takes. Is that what you want? To keep hunting? She was quiet for a moment, considering the question. For 3 years, hunting had been her life, her purpose, the thing that got her out of bed every morning and kept her moving through the endless days of pretending to be someone she was not. But now, the hunt was over. Torres was in custody. Phoenix was unraveling. The traitors who had killed her friends were facing justice. What came next? I want to fly again, she heard herself say. Really fly, not commercial routes or transport missions. I want to get back in a cockpit and do what I was trained to do. Hayes nodded slowly. That can be arranged. Top Gun has been asking about you. They want you back as an instructor. Top Gun? You are a legend there, Evelyn. The classes that trained under you had the highest performance ratings in the program's history. And now, with everything that has happened, you are more than a legend. You are a symbol. I do not want to be a symbol. I just want to fly. Sometimes, Hayes said gently, we do not get to choose what we become. Sometimes the world decides for us. The ceremony took place at Naval Air Station Miramar on a clear California morning. The hangar was packed with officers, enlisted personnel, and dignitaries who had come to witness something unprecedented. The official return of an officer who had been dead for 3 years. The public acknowledgement of sacrifices that could finally be spoken aloud. Evelyn stood at attention as the Secretary of Defense read the citation. Lieutenant Colonel Evelyn Hartwell, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty, the President of the United States takes pleasure in awarding you the Distinguished Service Cross. The words washed over her, formal and important, but somehow distant. She was thinking of Torres and Chen, the real Chen, her wingman who had died believing in something worth dying for. She was thinking of the passengers on Delta Flight 7742, 270 people who had come within minutes of death and would never know how close they had been. She was thinking of her mother, seated in the front row, tears streaming down her face, finally knowing the truth about the daughter she had mourned. When the medal was pinned to her chest, when the applause thundered through the hangar, when Jake Williams embraced her with the fierce joy of a friend who had never given up hope, Evelyn allowed herself to feel something she had denied for 3 years. Peace. Not the peace of ending, but the peace of beginning. Of closing one chapter and opening another, of finally being able to look forward instead of constantly watching behind. What now? Jake asked as the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse. Evelyn looked out at the runway where F-22s sat gleaming in the California sun, waiting to be flown. Now, she said, I go back to work. The first class she taught at Top Gun assembled on a Monday morning, 30 young pilots who represented the best and brightest of naval aviation. They stood at attention as she entered the briefing room, their faces a mixture of awe and curiosity. They had heard the stories. Everyone had heard the stories by now. Widowmaker, the pilot who would not stay dead, the woman who had flown a commercial airliner through a hostile intercept and lived to tell the tale. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Evelyn Hartwell, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. Some of you know my call sign. Some of you have heard stories about what I have done. Most of those stories are probably exaggerated. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the group. But here is what I can tell you that is not exaggerated. This job will test you in ways you cannot imagine. It will push you to your limits and then push you further. It will show you things about yourself that you might not want to see. She paused, letting the words sink in. Some of you will wash out. Some of you will decide this life is not for you. And some of you... She met their eyes one by one. Some of you will become the kind of pilots that legends are made of, the kind who fly into impossible situations and bring everyone home, the kind who never give up, never quit, never accept that something cannot be done. She walked to the window and looked out at the runway, where aircraft waited to carry these young warriors into the sky. 3 years ago, I was supposed to die. I did not. And every day since then, I have asked myself why. Why did I survive when better pilots than me did not? Why was I given a second chance when so many others were not? She turned back to face them. I do not have answers to those questions, but I have a purpose. And that purpose is standing in this room right now. You are the future of naval aviation. You are the ones who will carry on when my generation is gone. And my job is to make sure you are ready for whatever this world throws at you. She allowed herself a small smile. So, who is ready to fly? The hands that rose were eager, confident, unafraid. Just like she had been, once upon a time, just like she was again. Later that evening, Evelyn sat alone on the observation deck overlooking the flight line. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the last aircraft of the day were taxiing toward their hangars. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jake. Drinks tonight. The whole squadron is meeting at 7. You coming? She typed back a response. Would not miss it. Then she put the phone away and simply sat, watching the light fade over the airfield. She thought about everything that had led to this moment. The fear and the fighting, the hiding and the hunting, the moments of despair when she had wondered if any of it was worth it, and the moments of clarity when she had known it absolutely was. She thought about Torres, now awaiting trial for crimes that would keep him imprisoned for the rest of his life. She thought about the other members of Phoenix who had been brought to justice, their network dismantled, their secrets exposed. She thought about the passengers on that flight, scattered now across the country and the world, living their lives with no idea how close they had come to losing everything. And she thought about the future, the students she would teach, the pilots she would train, the missions she would support from the ground even as she longed to be in the air. It was not the life she had planned. It was not the path she would have chosen, but it was hers. A familiar figure appeared at the edge of her vision. Master Sergeant Frank Ortega, the veteran who had recognized her on the flight, who had saluted her when everyone else was still processing the revelation. Mind if I join you, ma'am? Not at all, Master Sergeant. Please. He settled into the chair beside her, his weathered face illuminated by the fading light. I wanted to say something, he said quietly. On that flight, before everything happened, I watched you work. Watched how you handled those people who were treating you like dirt. And I thought to myself, that woman is something special, something more than she appears. Evelyn smiled slightly. Was it that obvious? Only to someone who knew what to look for. Ortega paused. I served with your wingman, the real one, Chen. He was a good man. The best. He talked about you sometimes. Said you were the finest pilot he ever flew with. Said if anything ever happened to him, he hoped you would be the one to finish what he started. Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes, but did not let them fall. I hope I did, she said softly. You did, ma'am. You absolutely did. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun completed its descent, painting the world in shades of purple and indigo. What now? Ortega asked eventually. Evelyn looked out at the runway, where the last light was fading from the sky. Now, she said, we keep flying, we keep fighting, we keep protecting the people who need protecting, and stopping the ones who need stopping. Until when? Until we cannot anymore, and then we pass the torch to the next generation and trust them to carry on. Ortega nodded slowly. That sounds about right. He stood, stretching muscles that had seen decades of service. I am retiring next month, he said, finally hanging up the uniform after 34 years. But seeing what you did on that flight, seeing what you have become, it makes me think maybe I can leave this all in good hands. The best hands, Evelyn assured him. These young pilots, they are going to be extraordinary. I believe you, ma'am. I truly do. He saluted, a gesture of respect that carried the weight of a lifetime of service. Evelyn returned it, standing to attention as the last light faded from the California sky. And somewhere in the darkness, an F-22 Raptor roared down the runway and lifted into the night, its engines screaming a promise to the stars. Widowmaker was home, and she was just getting started. This story reminds us of a profound truth that we often forget in our daily lives. Never judge someone by their appearance or their current circumstances. The people who mocked Evelyn saw only a flight attendant serving drinks. They never imagined that behind that gentle smile was a warrior who had faced death and survived, a legend who had sacrificed everything to protect those she loved. In life, we encounter countless people like Evelyn, the quiet coworker who never speaks up in meetings, the janitor who cleans our office building, the elderly neighbor who lives alone. We never know what battles they have fought, what sacrifices they have made, what strength lies hidden beneath their humble exterior. True heroes do not advertise. They do not wear their medals on their sleeves or demand recognition for their service. They simply do what needs to be done, quietly, without fanfare, without expectation of reward. So, the next time you meet someone society considers ordinary, remember Widowmaker. Remember that greatness often wears disguise. And remember that the measure of a person is not in their title or their wealth, but in their courage when courage is required. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of hidden heroes walking among us. And in the comments below, tell us about an unsung hero in your life, someone whose quiet strength has inspired you. Because every hero deserves to be recognized, even if they never ask for it.